Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my special World Book Day video where I'm going to talk to you about 10-ish books that have a lot of meaning to me. So I'm just going to apologise now, my filming setup is really janky right now. I broke my tripod, so it's looking a bit odd and I think I'm a bit wonky, but we're just gonna go with it because this is the best I could do without everything falling apart. So to celebrate World Book Day, I thought I would explain to you some of the books that have a lot of meaning to me. There's gonna be a mixture of reasons why these are meaningful to me, so I'm just gonna go straight into it. The first one I actually didn't want to get out of my shelf because it is on the levels of the shelf that is below my desk, so it's really hard to get out. So instead I'm gonna put a picture up on the screen for you just because this book is quite delicate and I don't want to ruin it because I have read it a lot. So the first book is Muddle Earth by Paul Stewart and Chris Riddle. So Paul Stewart is the writer and Chris Riddle is the illustrator. And I remember finding this book in my local Waterstones and just knowing I had to have it. And it was at the time when I was little, I thought I should only read big books because that meant I was like a better reader. This is when I was like 7 or 8, okay, I was not like 16. And so this is a middle grade, it's a fantasy, and I actually don't remember much about the whole plot of this book, but I do remember it is kind of like a Middle Earth spoof and it's about a boy who gets sucked into this world of Muddle Earth and has to try and save them. I just remember that there's a wizard in it that only knows one spell and that there's all these really weird creatures. It's such peak middle grade humour and it just is so good. I would highly recommend it for anyone who loves silly cheeky middle grades, especially fantasy middle grades, and I think you can still buy it now. I think I had like a bind up because I think there is more than one book, but I think I had the copy that was all the books in one, but I'm not sure. The reason this one means so much to me is because honestly I just loved it a lot as a kid. I read and reread this book so many times that it's basically falling apart. I still have my original copy and I'm thinking about doing a video where I reread some of my childhood favourites, and then I was going to buy a new copy of this because I'm really worried about damaging it and I just love my old copy and I don't want it to fall apart on me. So we will see, but yeah, if I could show you it's like falling apart because I loved it so much as a kid. So I'm actually going to talk about the next 3 books together. So I remember my parents taking me to the library when I was about 10 years old because I'd said that I wanted to start reading again and they weren't sure if I was going to really commit to the books that I would pick, so they took me to the library so that I could try books there first without them having to buy me books and spend money on something I might not ever actually read. And there were 3 books that I picked up in that first library trip that completely got me back into reading, and I feel like I was just very lucky that I picked 3 amazing books that I loved so much, and those were, so I've got them on my lap so it's kind of balancing them. First one, so a couple of these I've talked to you about quite a few times on this channel. The first one is Shadow Forest by Matt Haig. So you're probably more likely to know Matt Haig for his Father Christmas series or for his adult literary fiction works or his adult non-fiction, but this is one of his lesser known books. It's part of a duology, and I think it's now called Samuel Blink and the Shadow Forest, but I'm not sure. And this is about 2 siblings whose parents die in an accident. They go to, I think it's Norway, to live with an aunt and uncle out there, and the uncle has disappeared. He went into this magical forest at the end of the garden one day and never came back, and so the siblings are told they can never go to the forest. The younger sister doesn't speak because of the trauma from the accident, but one day she goes missing in the forest and Samuel Blink has to go and save her. It was such a magical world. The second book is kind of more silly and fun. It's called The Runaway Troll and you can kind of gather what happens in that book, but I'm not going to give you spoilers because it is spoilers for this book. And this series is just so silly and fun. I would highly recommend it if you like the Spiderwick Chronicles. It's kind of similar vibes to that. And I just remember being so enthralled by this book and it really got me back into reading. Then of course one that I mention all the time, Northchild by Edith Patu. This is about a girl who makes a deal with a talking bear to go and live with him so that her family's fortunes can be sort of made better, and she has to try and figure out why this bear has decided to keep her in his ice castle. It is such a good fantasy, such a good adventure book, but it just, oh, this is the one I remember loving the most when I read those books from the library. This is the one that really got me, and still now I love this book. I've reread it. This isn't the edition that they had in the library when I read it. This is the new re-release edition because they have re-released it recently. It's now being marketed more as a middle grade, but I would say it is one of those upper end middle grades, lower end YA books. So yeah, I just remember loving this book, and it made me want to read more fantasy. And then finally, this is the only one that I don't think I've ever reread since then, and that is Attica by Gary Kilworth. Did I get it right? Yes. And actually this one's out of print. I found it on World of Books, I think. That's where I bought it secondhand, or maybe it was on Amazon, I can't remember. But or Amazon Marketplace, I mean, not Amazon selling new copies. And actually I was quite surprised to find when this arrived that it's actually a signed copy. It is dedicated to someone called Louise. Kind of sad that someone gave this up, or Louise gave this up, but I remember loving this book so much as a child. This is about a group of siblings who move to a new house in a new town and discover that their attic isn't an ordinary attic and it is magical, and they have to go on an adventure through this attic land called Attica to find a lost item. I can't remember what it was, but they're trying to find something. I remember loving this. I've looked now and the Goodreads ratings are not amazing for it, so I guess it might not be as good as I remember it being as a kid. But I just remember being swept away by the idea, and I think that shows how innocent of a reader I was as a younger child, is that I remember adoring all three of these books, giving all of them 5 stars, but I don't think any of them are like particularly highly rated on Goodreads. I think Shadow Forest and Northchild are still solid like high 3s, but they're not over 4. And Attica I think is a mid to a low 3 average on Goodreads. So these were just the books that got me back into reading. Now next is one that I just genuinely couldn't find on my shelves, and that is the Spud series. So some of you may know this because Troye Sivan actually played the main character of the books in the movie adaptations of these books. But this was one that I, again, randomly picked up in Waterstones as a tween. So I think I must have been about 12-ish when I read these, and the reason that these ones have a lot of meaning to me is because I didn't know anyone else that was reading these books, and it kind of felt like they were my books, and it was a series that was just mine, just for me, and it felt really special because I had this little world, and it's about a boys' boarding school. It's about a boy in South Africa who's not from a very high income family but gets a scholarship to a private boarding school, and it's about the hijinks that happened with him and his dorm mates, but also the emotional moments. And I just remember feeling like I had this little group of friends that were just for me and I remember loving it so much and finding it so funny and silly, and it's kind of crude, like it's teenage boys, so there's things that happen that are gross teenage boy things, but I just felt like it was just for me. And when I found out there were movie adaptations, I was really excited. I think I've watched the first one and it was okay for the books, but they weren't like super high budget, so they weren't amazing, and I don't think I've watched more than the first one. But yeah, I just remember feeling like they were just for me, and I still haven't met anyone, I don't think, that's read them other than like when I got my dad to read them. And yeah, it was the first time I pre-ordered a book because by the time I got to them, I think 3 books were out. And the 4th book, because I think there's 4, because it's 4 years of the school, the 4th book wasn't out yet, and it was the first book that was ever pre-ordered for me. My mum pre-ordered the 4th book for me, and I do really want to reread these because I remember actually there was a big gap between book 3 and 4, so I really struggled to remember what was going on by book 4, so I do want to reread these one day. Next is a classic one that I think will end up on a lot of people's books that have meaning to them if they grew up as teens in the 2010s, and that is Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This is definitely a book that I feel like anyone who is an elder Gen Z or a younger millennial will probably have some kind of attachment to. I think all of us read it, all of us got emotional, and for me it's just the first time that I felt seen with my mental health issues, and I felt like I could connect to that feeling of being an outsider and no one really liking you and getting kicked out of your friendship groups. So yeah, it is just the book that made me feel really seen, and I struggle to reread it because it still makes me really emotional. And another classic teen one that will be on a lot of people's lists is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. So this one I didn't actually read for quite a while because I was avoiding it, but then I found John and Hank Green's YouTube channel, which actually started before The Fault in Our Stars ever came out. It started in 2008, I think, or 2007. It started as a video project where they weren't allowed to use text-based communication to talk to each other, and they had to send each other videos back and forth via YouTube. I discovered them about 2012, I want to say, and I religiously watched all of their videos from 2008 all the way up to whatever year it was that I was watching them till, and I found out about The Fault in Our Stars through that YouTube channel, because by the time I got there, The Fault in Our Stars I think had already been published. This book reminds me of the community that I found by watching their videos. If you didn't know, Hank and John Green, or more so Hank Green, is the creator of VidCon, so the huge YouTube conventions. That was Hank, with John's help, but mostly Hank, because he's the one that has to be doing 100 things at once. And their like little fandom community was called Nerdfighteria, and if you're a fan of theirs, you're a Nerdfighter. And I remember feeling so connected and so seen in that community, especially when I found it on Tumblr, and I made real life friends through it at school, because we would recognise each other's like jokes related to it. So yeah, this book really stems from that, and it reminds me a lot of that era and the place of belonging I felt when I found it. Now I'm doing the next two together again, but they kind of are here for separate reasons, but because of the same series I thought I'd do them together, and that is ACOTAR and ACOMAF. So I'll do ACOTAR first. There was a bit of a gap between me reading most of the books I've mentioned previously and me picking up ACOTAR, and basically it's because I sort of fell out of love with reading as I got to like GCSE era, because there was just so much to do at school. I didn't have time for reading, and I, about 16 years old, wanted to get back into reading again, and I joined this book club at my local Waterstones, my local bookshop that was for teens. There were 3 of us in the book club plus a staff member, and one of the girls in the book club recommended I try ACOTAR because it was one of the best books she'd ever read, and she told me it was a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. I remember asking her actually if the first one's Beauty and the Beast retelling, what's the next one? And she was like, oh no, it doesn't, she's not doing like a retelling per book, it then goes off from there. And I just couldn't understand that concept. It was quite funny. And yeah, this was the book that I bought, and I just fell in love with it. I really loved it, and it suddenly made me realise that these fantasy worlds I got completely absorbed in as a child, like Muddle Earth, still existed for young adults, and I could get back into it. And so here we are. I got back into it through ACOTAR. And then the reason ACOMAF is on my list is because this is actually the first book I remember just sitting and reading from start to finish in one sitting, and it's quite a chunky book, so that's pretty impressive. But I remember that I bought these two together because I remember seeing the first one, and then my copy of ACOMAF is actually signed, and that's why I picked it up, because I remember going in to buy ACOTAR and seeing that they had signed copies of ACOMAF, so I was like, oh, may as well pick it up as it's signed, you never know. And I'm betting this is now worth a decent chunk of money. But of course I'm never going to part with it because it means so much to me. Because yeah, I remember as soon as I finished ACOTAR, I went and picked up ACOMAF, and I just could not stop reading. And it was the first time that I'd read a fantasy book where the author actually acknowledged the fact that these characters would get a lot of trauma from what happens to them in fantasy. Like before this, a lot of the time characters would go through a lot of stuff, and then writers would just kind of be like, and then they had happily ever after, whereas it felt like Sarah J Maas was truly addressing the trauma that happens in fantasy books, the mental health issues. And as much as these books are not amazing, it was the first time that I saw a more realistic kind of life happening in fantasy books. And so yeah, I couldn't stop reading it, and I definitely read it at too young an age for how graphic it is. Now we're staying on the Sarah J Maas train for one more book, and that is Throne of Glass. And the reason this one has meaning to me is because I actually was really good friends with the school librarian as a teenager, and she found out I loved ACOTAR, so she told me that I should try Throne of Glass. this is what we ended up bonding over, and that really connected us, because she personally prefers Throne of Glass to ACOTAR, and we just had so many conversations about this book. So I actually read all of the books that were available at the time. I borrowed all of them from the library, so I'm still rebuilding my collection of the Throne of Glass books. Now the next two are YouTuber books, and it's important for me to explain that as a teenager, YouTubers were a big thing for me. I did grow up in that YouTuber era, you know, the 2010s, where YouTubers were big deals. And I mean, they still are now, but back then you could probably name all the big YouTubers off the top of your head, whereas now you can't. So the two books that I have that mean a lot are The Secrets for the Mad by Dodie and Binge by Tyler Oakley. So I got Binge first because that one obviously came out first, and this is the first YouTuber book I bought. I remember complaining a lot about YouTuber books and not wanting to read them because it felt a bit like they were getting book deals that other people should have been getting. Money was being spent on them that should have been spent on other people, and I still kind of hold that view at times with celebrity books. But Binge by Tyler Oakley I actually found really helped me connect with him a lot more than his videos. He revealed a lot in this book that I feel like you couldn't have got from his videos, and he was really honest and real, and it reminds me of how much his videos and everything like that meant to me as a teenager. And then the same can be said for Dodie, except I never really watched her videos. It was more her music that meant a lot to me. So this is kind of a similar thing to The Fault in Our Stars and to Binge, and it reminds me of that era of feeling seen, feeling connected to these YouTubers. And this one is also signed because my dad went to her pop-up shop and got me a signed copy when he was in London, which will always mean a lot to me. Now the final one I'm going to talk about is a book that I inherited. I will give a trigger warning for death of a loved one. If you do not want to listen to discussions about that, this is when you can drop off in the video. That's the reason why I left it to the end. So yeah, if you need to drop off now, go ahead. So if you're still here, the book that I inherited that means a lot to me is A Study in Scarlet and the Hounds of the Baskervilles by Sir Anthony Conan Doyle. So this is actually my granddad's copy of the book. He used to order things from the Reader's Digest a lot. Like, he had loads of Reader Digest atlases and stuff like that, and after he passed away, my nan asked my dad and his sister to come around and help her clear out some of my granddad's stuff, and I went to help. And I don't even like Sherlock Holmes, but I just really love this edition. I think it looks really pretty, the spine on my shelf, so that's why I decided I wanted it. And it just reminds me of him. He didn't actually read. This is what I find really hilarious. My granddad didn't read. He never read a book like his entire life after he left school, but he had this, and I just find that really funny, and I love the edition, so I wanted to keep it. I kept a lot of little knickknacks that he had that remind me of him that I can keep for a long time, and I just really like the idea of having a book that belonged to him on my bookshelves. So those are all the books I wanted to talk to you about today. I would love to hear about any books that have meaning to you down in the comments. Let me know maybe books that really meant a lot to you as a kid, or if you have any books you've inherited from people. I'd love to hear about it, so let me know. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below, and if you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me the book stack emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Bye!